Some men believe a badge gives them the right to decide who belongs, but the law has a way of exposing the difference between authority and arrogance. Just after 6:15 on a cool Tuesday morning, Maple Ridge Drive was waking up the way quiet suburban streets always did. Automatic sprinklers clicked across neatly trimmed lawns. A newspaper landed with a soft thud near a brick walkway. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through open kitchen windows while dog walkers exchanged polite waves under a pale Virginia sunrise. Nothing about the neighborhood suggested that within the next few minutes, every security camera on the block would capture a moment people would be talking about for years. A black Ford Explorer rolled slowly around the corner before stopping in front of a modest two-story colonial house with white shutters and an American flag hanging beside the porch. Another patrol vehicle pulled in behind it. Officer Ethan McCall stepped out first, adjusting the body camera clip to his uniform before resting one hand near his duty belt. At 35, Ethan looked every bit like the confident police officer people expected to see on recruitment posters. Tall, broad-shouldered, clean-cut, and carrying himself with unquestioned confidence, he approached the front door without hesitation, convinced the anonymous tip waiting on his dashboard had already solved the case. According to the report, a dangerous federal fugitive had been hiding inside this address under a false identity. Ethan never questioned why the information had arrived without verification. He never wondered why the warrant request had been rushed before sunrise. He only believed he was about to make the biggest arrest of his career. Across the street, curtains quietly shifted as neighbors noticed the flashing lights. Phones appeared behind windows. One resident began recording from an upstairs bedroom, expecting nothing more than another routine police visit. Inside the house, Marcus Ellington had just finished pouring a cup of black coffee. At 49, he carried himself with the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades making decisions under pressure. His charcoal sweater, gray, slacks, and house shoes suggested an ordinary morning, not the beginning of a national incident. His natural curls showed a hint of silver around the temples, and the faint scar above his left eyebrow seemed almost invisible beneath the warm kitchen light. When the first knock echoed through the front hallway, he glanced toward the clock instead of the window. 3 deliberate knocks followed by a louder voice. Police department. Open the door. Marcus placed his coffee on the counter without rushing. Years of experience had taught him that panic almost never improved a situation. As he unlocked the front door and pulled it open, Ethan immediately stepped forward. "Marcus Ellington?" he asked sharply. Marcus met his eyes with quiet composure. "Yes. How can I help you, officer?" Ethan barely waited for the sentence to finish. "You're being detained pending investigation. Step outside." The words caught the attention of every neighbor within earshot. Marcus looked briefly at the patrol cars before returning his attention to Ethan. "May I ask what this concerns?" His voice remained steady, respectful, and remarkably calm. Ethan interpreted that calm as confidence from a guilty man. "You can explain everything downtown," he replied. "For now, turn around." Marcus neither argued nor resisted. He simply looked at Ethan for one long second, almost as if he were memorizing the young officer's face. Across the street, another camera began recording. Somewhere inside the house, a secure phone resting on a desk started vibrating for the first time that morning, but no one outside could hear it, and no one yet realized who was trying so desperately to make contact. Marcus slowly stepped onto the front porch with both hands visible, his expression unchanged despite the growing audience gathering behind curtains and driveways. The cool morning air carried the sound of distant lawn mowers beginning their weekly routine, creating an almost surreal contrast to the tension settling over the quiet neighborhood. Ethan McCall gave a brief nod toward another officer, who began following standard procedure while checking the information attached to the warrant. Marcus remained cooperative, answering each question with measured clarity. "Do you have any identification on you?" the second officer asked politely. "Yes," Marcus replied. "My wallet is in my right jacket pocket. I will remove it slowly." Ethan watched every movement with visible suspicion, convinced that calm behavior was simply another tactic. Marcus carefully handed over his driver's license without making any sudden motion. Ethan glanced down for less than 2 seconds before slipping it into an evidence envelope instead of examining it closely. "You can explain everything later," he said. Marcus looked directly at him. "Officer, I respectfully recommend that you verify my identity before making any further decisions." Ethan gave a short laugh that several nearby neighbors could clearly hear. "Everybody says that." The words hung in the air as another resident quietly began recording from a parked pickup truck across the street. Marcus did not respond with anger. Instead, he briefly looked toward the growing number of witnesses. He knew every phone pointed in his direction was preserving facts rather than opinions. That difference often mattered more than people realized. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Helen Foster, stepped closer to the edge of her lawn with concern written across her face. She had lived beside Marcus for nearly 8 years. She knew him as the man who carried groceries for elderly residents during snowstorms, attended neighborhood association meetings, and never missed the annual charity barbecue. "Officer," she called cautiously, "there has to be some mistake." "He has always been." Ethan raised one hand without looking at her. "Ma'am, please stay back. This is an active investigation." Helen fell silent, exchanging uncertain glances with several other neighbors. None of them understood what was happening, yet none recognized the address as belonging to one of the highest-ranking officials in federal law enforcement. At that same moment, nearly 100 miles away in Washington, a secure operations center displayed a flashing notification that had just changed from yellow to red. An encrypted location signal assigned to Director Marcus Ellington had stopped moving unexpectedly and failed its scheduled authentication sequence. Inside the monitoring room, an intelligence analyst frowned before reading the alert twice. "That cannot be right," he whispered. He reached for a secure phone and immediately initiated an emergency verification protocol. Back on Maple Ridge Drive, Ethan instructed another officer to place Marcus in the rear seat of the patrol vehicle while paperwork continued. Marcus entered without resistance, carefully adjusting his sweater before sitting upright. His breathing remained steady. He neither protested nor demanded special treatment. Instead, he quietly watched Ethan continue speaking with dispatch over the radio. Dispatch requested confirmation of the detainee's full legal name. Ethan answered confidently, spelling every letter. There was a brief pause. Then static interrupted the transmission before the dispatcher unexpectedly replied, "Unit 12, please stand by. We are receiving an administrative verification request." Ethan frowned. Administrative verification requests were uncommon during ordinary arrests. He pressed the radio again. "Dispatch, confirm warrant status." Several long seconds passed with no response. Ethan looked irritated rather than concerned, assuming the delay was nothing more than a computer issue. Sitting quietly behind the reinforced partition, Marcus glanced toward the patrol car's dashboard clock as another vibration echoed from the secure phone still resting inside his home office, unanswered for the third consecutive time, while hundreds of miles away a second encrypted line began ringing inside FBI headquarters, and this time the assistant director answered immediately. The short drive to the station felt strangely ordinary, and that was exactly what made it unsettling. Morning traffic had begun to build as commuters merged onto the highway, coffee cups balanced in center consoles, while local radio stations discussed weather forecasts and baseball scores. Through the reinforced window of the patrol vehicle, Marcus Ellington quietly watched the familiar streets pass by. His face showed no panic, only careful observation. Every traffic light, every turn, every passing government building reminded him how quickly ordinary decisions could create extraordinary consequences. Ethan McCall drove with one hand resting confidently on the steering wheel, occasionally glancing into the rearview mirror. Each time their eyes briefly met, Marcus remained composed. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "You have been unusually calm since this started." Marcus answered in the same measured tone he had used all morning. Remaining calm usually helps everyone make better decisions. Ethan gave a faint smile that carried more skepticism than respect. "You really believe this is all just a misunderstanding?" Marcus looked out the window before replying. "I believe facts eventually become impossible to ignore." Ethan dismissed the comment and continued driving. To him, those words sounded like another suspect trying to sound intelligent. He had encountered enough people claiming innocence over the years that confidence no longer impressed him. What he did not know was that Marcus had spent decades sitting across conference tables from cabinet officials, intelligence directors, and federal judges. Remaining calm was not an act. It was discipline developed over an entire career. Several miles away inside FBI headquarters, the atmosphere had changed completely. Assistant Director Rachel Donovan stood before a secure operations screen displaying Marcus Ellington's last verified authentication record. The system showed a growing list of failed contact attempts, each one automatically raising the internal priority level. Rachel looked toward the communications supervisor. Has Director Ellington answered any secure channel? The supervisor shook his head. No response on encrypted phone, satellite line, or secure mobile authentication. Rachel folded her arms. Marcus had never missed a scheduled authentication window without advance notice. Not once. She quietly reached for another secure telephone. Initiate director protection verification. I want local field office coordination immediately. The room became noticeably quieter. Agents exchanged brief looks without speaking. Everyone understood what that protocol meant. Back inside the patrol vehicle, Ethan's radio suddenly crackled to life. Unit 12, dispatch requesting immediate callback on your detainee verification. Ethan pressed the transmit button. Go ahead. A brief pause followed before dispatch answered with unexpected hesitation. Unit 12, communications requests that you verify the spelling of the detainee's last name again. Ethan frowned. Ellington. Echo Lima Lima India November Golf Tango Oscar November. Same as before. Another pause. Longer this time. Marcus remained silent, watching sunlight reflect across the windshield. Ethan tapped the steering wheel impatiently. Dispatch. The reply came several seconds later. Stand by. We are awaiting confirmation from another federal database. Ethan exhaled sharply. This is becoming ridiculous. He switched off the radio with visible irritation. Marcus simply turned his attention back toward the passing skyline. Neither man noticed that a dark sport utility vehicle several hundred yards behind them had quietly merged into the same lane. It maintained a legal distance without attracting attention, neither gaining nor falling back. Inside, two professionally dressed passengers watched the patrol vehicle through the windshield without speaking. One of them briefly glanced at a secure tablet displaying a flashing notification before looking at the driver. Maintain visual only, the passenger said calmly. Do not engage until authorization is confirmed. The driver nodded once. Back at the station, Sergeant Daniel Brooks had just finished reviewing the incoming morning reports when a dispatcher hurried toward his office carrying a printed message with an expression he had never seen before. Daniel accepted the paper, read the first line, then immediately read it again. His confident posture slowly disappeared as his eyes settled on a single sentence near the bottom of the page, and for the first time that morning, he reached for the station command phone without saying a word. The patrol vehicle rolled through the secured gate of the station just after 7 o'clock, its tires crunching softly across the gravel before stopping beside the intake entrance. Officers, arriving for the morning shift, barely glanced up, assuming another routine detention had begun like hundreds before it. Ethan McCall stepped out first, squared his shoulders, and opened the rear door. Marcus Ellington exited without hesitation, straightening his charcoal sweater before calmly looking around the parking lot. His expression never changed. He quietly noticed the surveillance cameras mounted above every entrance, the location of the dispatch office, and the steady flow of officers beginning their day. Years of experience had taught him that details often became more important than emotions. Ethan interpreted that composure as defiance. Still acting confident, he asked with a faint smirk. Marcus answered evenly. Confidence has nothing to do with this. Proper procedure does. Ethan shook his head dismissively and escorted him through the station doors. Inside, fluorescent lights reflected across polished tile floors while dispatchers answered emergency calls and detectives carried folders between offices. It looked like any professional police department beginning another workday. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm, something subtle had already started to shift. Sergeant Daniel Brooks stood outside his office holding the printed message he had received only moments earlier. He looked toward Ethan, then toward Marcus, before folding the paper and slipping it into his notebook. Bring him into processing, Daniel instructed, although the uncertainty in his voice was impossible to hide completely. Ethan nodded. We have a possible identity fraud case. Daniel hesitated for only a fraction of a second before replying. Just make sure every step is documented. Marcus quietly noticed the hesitation but said nothing. As standard booking procedures continued, An officer requested Marcus's personal information for verification. Marcus answered each question clearly and respectfully, never raising his voice. Name, date of birth, home address. Every answer matched the identification already collected from his wallet. The records clerk entered the information into the computer, expecting an ordinary confirmation. Instead, the screen froze for nearly 3 seconds before displaying a restricted access notification that immediately disappeared. The clerk blinked and refreshed the page. This time the system returned only a generic message instructing the user to contact a federal administrator. That is strange, she whispered almost to herself. Ethan overheard the comment and walked over. Computer problems? She gave a small shrug. Probably a network issue. Ethan waved it away. Finish the paperwork. The clerk nodded, although she could not ignore the uneasy feeling growing in the pit of her stomach. At nearly the same moment, inside FBI headquarters, Rachel Donovan received a secure confirmation from the Director Protection Office. The analyst looked directly at her. We have positive biometric confirmation. Director Ellington is no longer at his residence, and local authorities have not responded to emergency verification requests. Rachel did not hesitate. Notify the Washington field office, notify the United States Attorney Liaison, and assemble a response team. We leave immediately. No one in the room questioned the order. Within seconds, secure telephones began ringing across multiple offices while encrypted messages traveled through federal networks with the highest priority designation available. Back inside the station, Ethan completed another form before placing it on the counter. Marcus remained seated, hands resting comfortably in front of him, showing neither frustration nor fear. One younger officer quietly approached with a cup of water. Sir, would you like some? Marcus accepted it with a polite smile. Thank you. Ethan noticed the exchange and frowned. You do not need to make him comfortable. The younger officer looked briefly toward Daniel Brooks, who chose not to respond. The silence inside the room suddenly felt heavier than before. Then every desktop computer connected to the station network emitted the same sharp notification tone at exactly the same moment. Conversation stopped. Dispatchers looked toward their monitors. Daniel slowly turned his head toward the nearest screen as bold red lettering appeared across the top of the display, and before anyone could read the full message, the front desk officer rushed into processing and announced that several black sport utility vehicles had just entered the station parking lot. Outside the station, the quiet hum of ordinary traffic faded beneath the low rumble of powerful engines as 4 black sport utility vehicles turned through the front entrance in perfect sequence, followed by 2 unmarked government sedans. None of them activated emergency lights. None of them needed to. Their arrival alone drew the attention of every officer standing near the parking lot. Inside the processing area, conversations stopped almost instantly. Dispatch operators looked away from their computer screens toward the front windows while Sergeant Daniel Brooks walked briskly toward the lobby, the folded message still tucked inside his notebook. Ethan McCall remained convinced the timing was only an unfortunate coincidence. Probably another federal task force using the conference room, he muttered, more to reassure himself than anyone else. Marcus Ellington simply sat quietly in his chair, his hands resting comfortably before him. His expression remained composed, almost thoughtful, as though he had expected events to unfold according to a schedule invisible to everyone else. One of the younger officers glanced nervously through the glass entrance doors. Sergeant, there are a lot of them. Daniel answered without taking his eyes off the parking lot. Stay professional. Nobody jumps to conclusions. Yet even he could not ignore what he was seeing. The first vehicle door opened, and several professionally dressed federal agents stepped out with visible credentials displayed on their belts. They moved with calm purpose rather than urgency, spreading across the entrance while speaking quietly into concealed communication devices. There was no panic. There was no shouting. The discipline alone distinguished them from an ordinary response team. Back inside the processing room, the records clerk attempted one more identity search. This time the computer screen immediately locked and displayed a full-page notification instructing all users to stop processing the record and contact a designated federal authority. She stared at the screen, then looked toward Ethan. Officer McCall, I have never seen this before. Ethan walked over, read only the first line, and dismissed it with a wave of his hand. Systems fail every day? Finish what you can. The clerk hesitated. It will not let me continue. Ethan reached for the keyboard himself, pressing several keys with growing frustration, but the notification refused to disappear. At that exact moment, a secure telephone inside Sergeant Brooks's office began ringing with a distinctive tone reserved for interagency communications. Daniel immediately recognized the sound. Very few calls ever arrived through that line. He closed the office door behind him before answering. Sergeant Brooks speaking. A calm voice on the other end asked a single question. Do you currently have Marcus Ellington inside your facility? Daniel looked through the office window toward processing before answering carefully. Yes. The voice paused briefly. Sergeant, do not proceed with any additional processing steps. A federal response team is arriving. Preserve all records, all body camera footage, and all communications related to this detention. Daniel felt his heartbeat slow rather than accelerate. Experienced officers knew that the quietest instructions often carried the greatest weight. May I ask what this concerns? He said. The response came without hesitation. You will receive a formal briefing in person. The line disconnected. Daniel remained motionless for several seconds before lowering the receiver. Across the hall, Ethan continued completing paperwork, unaware of the conversation that had just taken place. He glanced toward Marcus and noticed the same calm expression that had irritated him since the arrest began. You still think somebody is coming to help you? Ethan asked with a confident smile. Marcus met his eyes without changing his tone. I think everyone deserves the opportunity to verify the truth before reaching conclusions. Ethan shook his head and laughed quietly. Before he could respond, the front lobby doors opened, and the station receptionist rose from her desk as a woman in a dark tailored suit entered with measured confidence, accompanied by several federal agents carrying official credential wallets. The room fell silent as she stopped at the reception desk, presented her identification, and spoke clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. My name is Rachel Donovan. I need to see whoever authorized the detention of Director Marcus Ellington immediately. The receptionist's words echoed through the lobby with surprising clarity, and for several long seconds no one moved. Officers standing near the front desk exchanged uncertain glances while Sergeant Daniel Brooks stepped forward from the hallway, his professional composure returning despite the questions racing through his mind. Rachel Donovan calmly handed him her federal credentials. Daniel examined them carefully, recognizing the level of authorization immediately. His expression changed almost imperceptibly before he looked back at her. I am Sergeant Brooks. How can this department assist you? Rachel did not waste a single word. Approximately 45 minutes ago, Director Marcus Ellington ceased all scheduled secure communications. We have confirmed that he was detained by officers assigned to this station. I need to see him immediately. Ethan McCall had just entered the lobby in time to hear the final sentence. He frowned and stepped forward. Director? He repeated with obvious disbelief. Rachel turned toward him with the calm confidence of someone who had already verified every fact before entering the building. Yes, Director Marcus Ellington. Ethan folded his arms. There must be some misunderstanding. The individual we detained identified himself as Marcus Ellington, but anybody can claim a name. Rachel reached into a secure document case and removed a sealed federal folder. She placed it on the reception counter without raising her voice. Nobody claimed anything. His identity has already been confirmed through biometric authentication, secure federal records, and continuous executive protection protocols. The room became noticeably quieter. Even officers working nearby had stopped pretending to focus on paperwork. Rachel opened the folder and slid several authenticated documents across the counter toward Daniel Brooks. Each page carried official government markings and matching identification photographs. Daniel carefully compared the images to the man currently sitting in processing. Every detail matched perfectly. The scar above the left eyebrow, the silver beginning to appear around the temples, the calm expression that had never changed. Daniel slowly lowered the papers, feeling the weight of the situation settle across his shoulders. Ethan took one quick glance at the documents before shaking his head. That cannot be right. If he were really who you say he is, he would have told us. Before Rachel could answer, Marcus's voice came quietly from the processing room behind them. Officer McCall, I did ask that my identity be verified before further decisions were made. Nobody had noticed that the processing door had been left partially open. Every head turned toward Marcus as he stood calmly beside the booking counter, exactly where he had remained throughout the entire morning. Rachel walked toward him without hesitation. Director Ellington. Her respectful greeting carried no theatrical emotion, only professional acknowledgement. Marcus offered a small nod. Thank you for responding so quickly. Ethan stared silently as Rachel handed Marcus his official credential wallet, which had been retrieved through federal verification channels. Marcus accepted it without immediately opening it. Instead, he looked toward Daniel Brooks. Sergeant, I appreciate that your personnel have remained professional during processing. However, several requests for identity verification were made before my arrival here. Daniel lowered his eyes briefly. I understand. Ethan finally found his voice. You are telling me that. He stopped before finishing the sentence, unable to reconcile the confident suspect he believed he had arrested with the senior federal official now standing only a few feet away. Rachel answered the unfinished question for him. You detained the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation during an active security status without completing identity verification. The words landed with far greater force than anyone expected, not because they were spoken loudly, but because every officer in the room immediately understood their significance. No one spoke. The dispatch center had gone completely silent. Somewhere in the hallway, a printer continued feeding paper into an output tray, sounding unusually loud against the stillness. Then another federal agent entered from outside carrying a sealed evidence container and quietly approached Rachel before whispering only 6 words into her ear. Her expression remained controlled, but she immediately turned toward Daniel Brooks and said, Sergeant, before we proceed any further, there is another development that you need to see immediately. Daniel Brooks accepted the sealed evidence container from the federal agent with both hands, carefully breaking the security seal only after Rachel Donovan nodded her approval. Inside rested a secure tablet already unlocked to a series of synchronized records. The first screen displayed the encrypted authentication log confirming Marcus Ellington's identity. The second contained the exact timeline of every failed attempt to reach him that morning. The third showed something that caused Daniel's expression to harden. Every minute from the initial detention until Rachel's arrival had been documented through federal monitoring procedures triggered by the unexplained interruption of communications with the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Daniel slowly looked up. This timeline began before my officers even arrived at the residence. Rachel gave a slight nod. The moment Director Ellington failed his scheduled authentication sequence, multiple protective protocols were automatically activated. Our responsibility was to determine whether this was a communications failure, a medical emergency, or an unauthorized detention. Ethan McCall remained frozen near the booking desk, still trying to understand how an apparently ordinary arrest had unfolded into a federal response unlike anything he had ever witnessed. Nobody informed us, he said quietly. Rachel answered without accusation. That is because the purpose of the verification process is to establish facts before assumptions spread. Marcus stood nearby, listening without interruption. He had not once raised his voice since the encounter began, and that silence now carried more weight than any argument could have. Several officers who had watched the booking process exchanged uneasy looks as they replayed the morning in their minds. One remembered Marcus politely requesting identity verification. Another recalled how calmly he had answered every question. None of those moments had seemed important until now. The younger officer who had offered Marcus a cup of water lowered his eyes, realizing he had sensed something unusual long before anyone else. Rachel turned toward Daniel again. Sergeant, effective immediately, we are requesting preservation of all body camera recordings, dashboard camera footage, radio traffic, booking records, surveillance video, and dispatch communications connected to today's events. Daniel answered immediately. Everything will be preserved. Rachel thanked him with a brief nod. Your cooperation is appreciated. Ethan finally stepped forward. Are you opening a criminal investigation? The room became completely silent again. Rachel chose her words carefully. At this stage, we are conducting a formal federal review of the circumstances surrounding the detention. Reviews exist to establish verified facts, identify procedural failures if they occurred, and determine appropriate administrative actions. Her answer was calm, precise, and impossible to misinterpret. Marcus looked toward Ethan for the first time since Rachel had entered the building. There was no satisfaction in his expression, no anger, and no trace of humiliation. "Officer McCall," he said evenly, "every profession carries extraordinary responsibility. The authority entrusted to law enforcement depends on careful judgment, especially when uncertainty exists." Ethan opened his mouth as though searching for an explanation, but none came. For the first time that morning, confidence gave way to reflection. Daniel quietly instructed another officer to secure every digital recording connected to the incident. Within minutes, technicians began copying body camera files while dispatch supervisors archived radio transmissions under evidence retention procedures. Nobody complained. Nobody questioned the order. Everyone understood that accuracy now mattered more than speed. As the preservation process continued, one federal agent walked toward the reception desk carrying a tablet that had just received additional information from headquarters. He stopped beside Rachel and turned the screen toward her. She read the update once, then a second time, her composed expression changing only slightly before she looked directly at Marcus. "Director," she said, "our analyst completed a preliminary review of the anonymous tip that initiated today's response." Marcus met her eyes calmly, and Rachel closed the tablet before answering. "The source of that information does not appear to be what anyone expected, and if the initial assessment is correct, this situation extends far beyond a single mistaken detention." Rachel Donovan allowed several quiet seconds to pass before speaking again, giving everyone in the room time to absorb the significance of her last statement. The silence felt heavier than any raised voice could have. Officers who had been moving confidently through the station less than an hour earlier now stood perfectly still, watching the conversation unfold with growing uncertainty. Marcus Ellington remained composed, his posture unchanged despite the attention surrounding him. "What have your analysts found?" he asked calmly. Rachel held the secure tablet at her side. The anonymous tip that initiated this response did not originate from any verified federal database, nor from any cooperating law enforcement agency. It was routed through multiple anonymous digital channels before reaching local dispatch. Daniel Brooks slowly exhaled. Someone deliberately concealed the source. Rachel nodded once. "That appears to be the case." Ethan McCall listened carefully, hoping the revelation might somehow explain the decisions he had made. "Then whoever sent it set us up." Rachel looked directly at him before answering. "Officer McCall, the source of the information and the decisions made after receiving that information are separate issues. Both deserve careful examination." Those words settled heavily across the room. Marcus quietly observed Ethan, recognizing the moment when confidence had given way to genuine reflection. For the first time that morning, Ethan seemed less interested in defending himself than understanding where everything had gone wrong. The younger officer who had offered Marcus a cup of water finally spoke. "Sir, if identity verification had been completed first, would any of this have happened?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "Verification exists precisely because assumptions can be wrong. Procedures protect everyone, including officers." The simple response carried no accusation, yet several people lowered their eyes. In another corner of the station, technicians continued preserving digital evidence, while federal agents documented every step using standard interagency procedures. Nothing about the process appeared dramatic. Every action followed established policy, reinforcing that accountability often arrived through careful documentation rather than confrontation. A few minutes later, Rachel received another secure message. She reviewed it silently before looking toward Marcus again. "Director, headquarters has confirmed that every security camera on your street captured the initial contact. Several residents voluntarily preserved their recordings before investigators even arrived." Daniel immediately understood why that mattered. Independent recordings would establish an objective timeline from multiple angles. They would neither favor the officers nor Director Ellington. They would simply show exactly what occurred. That realization seemed to settle over Ethan as well. He remembered every instruction given, every request Marcus had made, and every opportunity that had existed to pause and verify. The memories now felt different because they were no longer filtered through certainty. Marcus turned toward Daniel. "Sergeant, I appreciate your department's cooperation since federal personnel arrived. Transparency serves the public far better than defensiveness." Daniel answered quietly. Director, regardless of the outcome, this department will cooperate fully. Rachel acknowledged the exchange with a slight nod before addressing everyone in the room. Our responsibility is to establish facts, preserve evidence, and allow the review process to determine appropriate conclusions. No one benefits when speculation replaces documentation. Her words restored a measure of calm to the station. Officers gradually returned to their assignments, though conversations remained subdued. The atmosphere had changed permanently. What began as an ordinary shift had become a lesson that many would remember throughout their careers. Just as Marcus prepared to leave the processing area alongside Rachel, another federal analyst appeared on a secure video call displayed across the tablet screen. His normally steady voice carried an unmistakable note of surprise. Director, we have completed the first forensic trace on the anonymous submission. We now know where it entered the system. Rachel looked at the location displayed on the screen, then slowly raised her eyes toward Daniel Brooks. Sergeant, she said evenly, the digital trail does not lead outside your jurisdiction. It leads back to someone with authorized access much closer than any of us expected. The room remained silent as the federal analyst expanded the forensic report on the secure screen. Colored lines traced the anonymous submission through a series of relay servers before ending at its original entry point. Daniel Brooks leaned closer, expecting to see another distant location. Instead, the final marker displayed a municipal network assigned to the county communications system. Rachel Donovan spoke carefully. The evidence indicates that the anonymous information entered the reporting network from a terminal authorized to access local law enforcement resources. That does not establish intent or identify the individual responsible, but it does establish where the transmission began. Daniel slowly nodded. Then the review will determine exactly who accessed that terminal and under what circumstances. Rachel agreed. Every login, every timestamp, and every audit record has already been preserved. Ethan McCall lowered his eyes. For the first time since sunrise, he stopped thinking about proving himself right and began thinking about every opportunity he had ignored. He remembered Marcus asking for identity verification. He remembered the hesitation from the records clerk. He remembered dispatch requesting another confirmation of the name. None of those moments had forced a particular outcome, but together they had formed a series of chances to slow down and let facts replace assumptions. Marcus Ellington quietly walked toward him. There was no anger in his expression, only steady resolve. Ethan finally spoke. Director Ellington, I should have listened when you asked me to verify your identity. Marcus answered without hesitation. Verification protects everyone. It protects citizens from mistakes, and it protects officers from making them. Ethan nodded once. I understand that now. Marcus looked around the station at the officers who had gathered nearby. Every person in this building accepted an oath that carries enormous responsibility. Public trust is not built by never making mistakes. It is built by responding to mistakes with honesty, accountability, and a willingness to improve. No one interrupted him. His words were calm, yet they reached every corner of the room. Rachel then confirmed that the federal review would continue independently and that all evidence would be evaluated according to established procedures. She thanked Sergeant Brooks for preserving the records immediately after receiving federal instructions. Daniel acknowledged the statement with quiet professionalism. Whatever the findings may be, they will be based on documented facts. Outside, the morning had fully arrived. The neighborhood where everything had begun was returning to its ordinary rhythm, while inside the station the atmosphere felt permanently changed. Officers resumed their duties with a different awareness than they had carried only a few hours earlier. The younger officer who had offered Marcus a cup of water watched him leave and silently promised himself that every future encounter would begin with patience rather than assumptions. Ethan remained standing in the lobby for several moments after the federal team departed. The badge on his uniform had not changed, but his understanding of what it represented had. He realized that authority was never measured by how quickly someone acted. It was measured by the discipline to pause, verify, and treat every person with equal dignity under the law. Marcus stepped outside beside Rachel Donovan, took one slow breath of the cool morning air, and looked back only once at the building behind him. There would be reports, reviews, and policy discussions in the days ahead, but he knew the most important lesson had already begun. It had not come from anger. It had not come from revenge. It had come from the quiet power of truth revealed through careful procedure. As the black vehicles pulled away from the station, the sunlight reflected across their windows, leaving behind a message that no official document could express more clearly. A uniform may symbolize authority, but character determines how that authority is used. A title may command respect, but integrity is what earns it. And on that ordinary Tuesday morning, everyone who witnessed those events learned the same lasting lesson. The strongest form of justice is not the power to accuse. It is the wisdom to seek the truth before reaching a conclusion.